alcoholic drug-using biker prisoner was being released after years of serving in the penitentiary named Sam. He's greeted by his wife Lynn waiting in the red car. They leave the penitentiary and stop by the roadside to have intercourse. Sam immediately asks his wife for a smoke. However, he found out that Lynn had already quit the vices they had. Sam and Lynn continue their way home. They're greeted by their daughter and Sam's mother upon arriving home. Sam asks about Lynn's shift, but he finds out that his wife has already quit dancing in the strip club. Sam is mad about this news and calls his wife brainless for trading Lynn's stripping job for a job in a factory. Lynn explains that her new job is a lot better than stripping since it's clean money, has good benefits for the family, and has a daycare facility for their daughter. Sam learned that Lynn has already accepted Christ as her savior. That's why Lynn totally quit the wrong activities she made in the past. Because of anger, Sam leaves the house, but Lynn tells her that he can't keep going the way Sam has been. Using his motorcycle, Sam went to his friend Donnie at a club. He went back to partying and drugs. While Lynn and their daughter are attending praise and worship in the church, Sam, on the other hand, is still going out doing drugs and alcohol. One evening, Donnie and Sam are out to rob a random street drug dealer in his house. They're armed with high-powered weapons. They successfully take out vast amounts of drugs and some cash. Donnie and Sam are out in the city and driving while doing drugs. They happen to pass by a beggar and let it hop in the car. The beggar took out a sharp blade and placed it to Donnie's throat. The beggar says he will cut Donnie's throat if they don't drive him to Dunshore. However, Sam manages to hold the beggar's hand and step into the brake to scare the guy. He then immediately went to the backseat to stab and kill the beggar and drop it off somewhere that no one could trace. On that same night, Sam arrives home in distress about what happened. Lynn wakes up and notices the sharp breathings that Sam has made. Sam asks his wife. Sam is shaken by the experience he had, so he allowed his wife to persuade him to go to church with her, where he is eventually baptized and offered salvation. Sam is welcomed home by the pastor and the rest of the people praising God. Meanwhile, Sam found a stable job as a construction worker from partying and drugs. He did great jobs on his work each day to save up for his family. Since the night that Sam had that traumatic experience with his friend, he finally dared to visit Donnie in their old hangout place. Sam has changed a lot. He becomes a family man and begins to read books for his daughter. On the other hand, strong tornadoes hit Sam and Lynn's place. Sam happens to build an underground building a few years and opens it using a rifle. He successfully put Lynn and his daughter underground. Luckily, they survived the tornadoes. Sam's old employer to the construction company visited him to offer a business. From his hard work, Sam later on starts his own construction company. Sam's business is doing good, and he's able to buy a new house for his family. Sam and Lynn continue to attend praise and worship meetings at the church. He suddenly remembers his friend Donnie. He successfully rescued his friend from a drug house and brought him to his house. One fine morning, Sam shares the news to his family about a mission in Uganda. A pastor from the church happens to share this idea. Sam's heart kindred upon hearing this and wants to offer his help to those in need. Sam arrives in Uganda to start building homes for the refugees. He spots two men watching over as he's working. Sam talks to them and finds out that they are members of the Sudan People's Liberation Army, or SPLA, named Deng and Marco. Sam has his break later in the afternoon. The pastor has offered his men to come along with a celebration on the coming weekend. However, Sam has other plans to go up north of Uganda. The pastor warns him of an ongoing civil war, but Sam still insists. He asks Deng, the SPLA soldier, to come along with him. Deng shows him around Sudan when the weekend comes. Sam asks Deng about his background. He's saddened about the whereabouts of his friend's family, who was killed by the LRA. Deng claims the LRA has been killing Christians in the south for 30 years. They arrive at a medical tent in Sudan, where Sam has witnessed people with a disease for malaria and cholera. As Deng moves off to talk to some people, Sam is roped in by a female doctor named Paige to help lift a lipless Sudanese woman onto the examination table. Sam saw the worst instances inside the tent caused by Connie, the LRA commander. Paige questioned Sam who he was with and why he was in Sudan, which is a war zone. She threatened Sam he will be murdered if he remains any longer. Sam inquired about Connie. Deng tells him that Connie calls himself a Christian but acts like Satan and kills people. That night, as they lay on their beds at the relief station, they hear noises outside, and when they look out, Sam and the soldier see a large number of Sudanese children swarming around to sleep outside the building. Deng explains that their parents sent them to sleep over here because it's safer than staying in their own village. Sam wakes up the children and gets as many as he can fit sleep in their room for the night. On the following morning, Deng awakens Sam to inform that the LRA attacked the village. Sam was in a deep sleep and didn't notice the children he brought inside his room were gone. Sam and the soldiers follow the children back to their village, only to find that the LRA has burned it down and killed their parents. One of the children runs after his dog and is killed by a hidden landmine. Sam cradles the dead child and cries. The experience traumatizes and changes Sam. Sam later on went back to his family. He's greeted by his wife and his daughter. Sam's experience in Sudan made him realize how lucky he was with his family. Sam wasn't able to sleep that night to make plans. Sam has a vision from God and intends to create an orphanage for South Sudanese children, as well as a church open to everybody. After finishing it, he starts preaching at his church and helps his old buddy Donnie discover God. Sam later on returns to Africa with new equipment to the SPLAs. He went out to the north of Sudan to survey a prospective location for the planned orphanage. Sam went to the landowner and asked to buy the land. However, the landowner is confused by his urgent action and warns Sam that this is a war zone. Sam, being hard-headed, still insists on his plan and starts building the orphanage. One evening, the orphanage was finished from construction. The orphanage was completed one evening. Sam is watching a video of his daughter's school performance when the LRA attacks the village. The LRA has started shooting and torching the new orphanage. The LRA has been shooting and burning down the newly constructed orphanage. Sam then phones home, telling his wife what has happened and that he's given up. She reminds him that the orphans have been through worse, but they have not given up and that he should not give up, and tells him to rebuild the orphanage. After the orphanage was rebuilt, they were attacked by the LRAs again. A child is brought to the orphanage covered with blood and given first aid by the orphanage caretaker. Soon after, the child died. Sam has returned to Pennsylvania and preaches to the church he built. Sam opens up to Lynn about his plans to the orphanage. Later that day, Sam went to a bank to take a loan for his projects. The banker asked him to attend a party later that day to talk about the money that Sam asked from the banker. Upon arriving at the party, Sam and his family were greeted by a mansion. He's confident about the deal that he asked for. The banker asked him to talk in his office and handed him a small envelope. All smiles and ear for Sam, as he thought it was the money he asked for, but instead, it's only $150 to feed the orphans. He immediately stormed out of that mansion with his family and left. Sam continues to spread the words of God and encourages everyone to do good while they're still hoping. Sam sells some of his guns and his car to fund his project with the orphanage. Upon arrival in Sudan, he surprises the children with a set of playgrounds. Kids are thrilled upon seeing a playground for the first time in their lives. Dang informs Sam that he was adding more guards for him to secure his safety. Connie is eager to kill Sam and has been offering money to people who can bring Sam's head to him. While having small talk with Dang, a group of men come inside the orphanage. Dang tells Sam that the Sudan leader is approaching their site. The leader personally asked Sam and named him as the White Preacher. Sam is overwhelmed that his efforts are recognized by a leader. The leader invited Sam for peace talks to Russia as his guest. On a fine day, Sam and the soldiers are out in the field to look for more children kidnapped by the LRA. They spot two kids tied to their feet under the scorching heat of the sun. Sam is about to approach them when a gunshot hits one of the soldiers. The kids were set as bait to kill Sam. They managed to return the bullet from the LRA, hiding from mountain peaks. Later in the evening, Sam received a phone call from Donnie. He asks Sam about his well-being, as well as Sam asks Donnie and his family. The next day, Sam and the soldiers went out to grab some food and supplies to southern Sudan. He sees Paige asking about his mission and his intentions. Paige is not convinced by Sam's good Samaritan attitude and warns him that he might be the next Connie, the leader of the LRA. The LRA attacks Sam and his SPLA friends on their way back to the orphanage. After managing to chase off the small force of attackers, they search the area and discover a large group of Sudanese children hiding in a ditch not far from the road. Since they can't take all the children in one trip, Sam chooses to take the ones who need medical attention along with a few others on their first trip back to the orphanage. However, upon returning to the spot as quickly as he could, he finds that the LRA killed and burnt those he had left behind. This causes Sam to lead armed raids to rescue children from the LRA. Sam went back to the USA again to see his family and to preach in his church. He's still seeking funding for his project and is asked the bank for another loan. However, Sam receives a no again that makes him furious and frustrated. Later that night, while watching TV with his daughter and Donnie, Sam learns some shocking news: the assassination of the SPLA leader on his way to Russia for peace talks. Sam is horrified by his family's luxuries and petty worries, as well as their seeming disinterest in the Sudanese children. Sam even neglects his family and beats up a biker for making racial remarks about the kids. Meanwhile, his sober friend Donnie overdoses and dies. This adds to Sam's negativity and misery. Sam sells his company to finance his Sudan project, causing a confrontation with his wife. He abandons his family and returns to Sudan. Paige and a medical team are assaulted by LRA on their way to the orphanage. She went to talk to them, but she was hit by a gun without a word. Sam happens to be on the lookout for them, and he shoots and kills the LRA. His faith and mission are revitalized when an orphan boy tells his personal story to Sam. The boy tells him that if he allows hatred to fester in his heart, his fight against injustice fails. The next day, he engages with a